I'm sure you've all heard of the Stanford Prison Experiment or the Little Albert Experiment, but let me tell you, us humans have done so much worse. Hello everyone and welcome back to our channel. I'm your host Emily, and today we're counting down our list of the top 10 unsettling human experiments in history you were never taught in American schools. Coming in at number 10 is Tuskegee Syphilis Study. Syphilis was a major public health problem in the 1920s, and in 1928, the Julius Rosenwald Fund, a charity organization, launched a public healthcare project for blacks in the American rural South. Unfortunately, the Great Depression rocked the US in 1929, and the project lost its funding. Changes were then made to the program. Instead of treating health problems in underserved areas, in 1932, poor black men in Alabama were instead enrolled in a program to treat what they were told was their bad blood. They were given free medical care as well as food and other amenities such as burial insurance for participating in the study. But what they didn't know was that they were being tricked. The men in the study weren't told that they were recruited for the program because they were actually suffering from syphilis, nor were they told that they were taking part in a government experiment studying untreated syphilis. It was called the Tuskegee Study of Untreated Syphilis in the Negro Male. That's right, untreated. Now, despite thinking that they were receiving medical care, subjects were never actually properly treated for the disease. Now, this went on even after penicillin hit the scene and became the go-to treatment for the infection in 1945, and after rapid treatment centers were established in 1947. Now, despite concerns raised about the ethics of the Tuskegee Syphilis Study as early as 1936, the study didn't actually end until 1972, after the media reported on the multi-decade experiment and there was subsequent public outrage. Number 9. The human vivisections of Herophilus. Ancient physician Herophilus is considered the father of anatomy, and while he made significant discoveries during his practice, it's how he learned about internal workings of the human body that lands him on this list. Herophilus practiced medicine in Alexandria, Egypt, and for at least about 30 to 40 years, he was allowed to dissect human bodies, which he did publicly, along with contemporary Greek physician and autonomous Aristratus. Under the laws of the time, criminals could be sentenced to dissection and vivisection as a punishment, and it said the father of anatomy not only dissected the dead, but also performed vivisections on an estimated 600 living prisoners. Now, Herophilus made great strides in the study of human anatomy, especially the brain, eyes, liver, circulatory system, nervous system, and reproductive system, during a time in history when dissecting human cadavers was considered an act of discretion of the body. And like today, performing vivisections on living bodies was considered butchery, but at the time it was allowed, and he sure did capitalize off of it. Number 8. The Boston Project. Working with the Oak Ridge National Laboratory from 1953 to 57, Dr. William Sweet, who was the chief neurosurgeon at Harvard's Massachusetts General Hospital, gave uranium injections to 11 cancer patients who were terminally ill, with all but one reportedly suffering from brain tumors. Dr. Sweet was interested in learning how the distribution of uranium affected the body and whether it could be used to treat tumors. In 1995, under testimony, Dr. Sweet claimed that he had consent from his patients for his experiments. However, a lack of supporting documents, as well as the case of one patient who was found unconscious and later died without regaining consciousness or being identified, makes those claims slightly dubious. Number 7. The father of gynecology. Throughout the 1840s, J. Marion Sims, who is often referred to as the father of gynecology, performed surgical experiments on enslaved African women without anesthesia. The women, one of whom was operated on 30 times, suffered from infections and many failed surgeries before they were finally cured. The period which Sims operated on enslaved women between 1845 and 1849 was one of which new practice of anesthesia was not universally accepted as safe and effective. It has also been claimed that he addicted the women in his surgical experiments to morphine, only providing the drugs after the surgery was already completed to make them more compliant. Number 6. The Stateville Penitentiary Malaria Study. The Stateville Penitentiary Malaria Study was a controlled study of the effects of malaria on prisoners of Stateville Penitentiary near Joliet, Illinois, beginning in the 1940s. The study was conducted by the Department of Medicine, now the Pritzker School of Medicine, at the University of Chicago, in conjunction with the United States Army and the U.S. State Department. At the Nuremberg trials, German doctors cited the precedent of the malaria experiments as part of their defense. The study continued at the Stateville Penitentiary for 29 years. In related studies from 1944 to 1946, Dr. Alf Alvring, a nephrologist and professor at the University of Chicago Medical School, purposely infected psychiatric patients at the Illinois State Hospital with malaria so that he could test experimental treatments on them. Number 5. The Guatemala Study. In a 1946 to 1948 study in Guatemala, U.S. researchers used prostitutes to infect prison inmates, insane asylum patients, and Guatemalan soldiers with syphilis and other sexually transmitted diseases to test the effectiveness of penicillin in treating STDs. They later tried infecting people with direct inoculations made from syphilis bacteria poured into the men's private parts and on forearms and faces that were slightly abraded, or in a few cases through spinal punctures. Approximately 700 people were infected as part of the study. The study was sponsored by the Public Health Service, the National Institute of Health, the Pan American Healthy Sanitary Bureau, now the World Health Organization, Pan's American Health Organization, and the Guatemalan government. Now, the team was led by John Charles Cutler, who later participated in the Tuskegee syphilis experiments. Cutler chose to do the study in Guatemala because he would not have been permitted to do it in the United States. In 2012, when the research was revealed, the U.S. officially apologized to Guatemala for the studies. A lawsuit has been launched against Johns Hopkins University, Bristol Myers Squibb, and the Rockefeller Foundation for alleged involvement in the study. Number 4. The Holmesburg Prison Studies. From approximately 1951 to 1974, the Holmesburg prison in Pennsylvania was the site of extensive dermatological research operations using prisoners as subjects. Led by Dr. Albert M. Kilman of the University of Pennsylvania, the study was performed on behalf of Dow Chemical Company, the U.S. Army, and Johnson & Johnson. Dow Chemical wanted to study the health effects of dioxin and other herbicides to discover how they affect human skin because workers at its chemical plants were developing chloracne. In the study, Kilman applied about the same amount of dioxin as to which the Dow employees were being exposed. In 1980 and 1981, some of the people who were used in the study sued Kilman because they were suffering from a variety of health problems, including lupus and psychological damage. Kilman later continued his dioxin studies, increasing the dosage of dioxin, which he applied again of 10 prisoners, to 7,500 micrograms of dioxin, which is 468 times the dosage of the Dow Chemical official Gerald K. Rowe had authorized him to administer. Now, as a result, the prisoners developed inflammatory pustules and papules, and the Holmesburg program paid hundreds of inmates to test a wide range of cosmetic products and chemical compounds whose health effects were unknown at the time. A 1964 issue of Medical News reported that 9 out of 10 prisoners at Holmesburg Prison were medical test subjects. Number 3. Operation Artichoke. The U.S.'s interest in developing a truth serum began in 1943 when the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, began experimenting with a truth drug, which would produce uninhibited truthfulness in an interrogated person. In studies running from 1947 to 1953, which were known as Project Chatter, the U.S. Navy began identifying and testing truth serums, which they hoped could be used during interrogations of Soviet spies. Now, Operation Artichoke was a CIA-led program that ran from 1951 to 1961 and sought to investigate the use of hypnosis and other forms of psychological manipulation in intelligence gathering and behavior modification. This program was part of the larger MKUltra project initiated by the CIA to study the effects of psychological manipulation on human subjects. Specifically, Operation Artichoke aimed to assess the efficiency of hypnosis and other psychological techniques in eliciting information from interrogated individuals. In addition, it also sought to understand how hypnosis could be used in altering person's memory or behavior for covert operations. Now, despite its potential applications, the program was controversial and eventually discontinued due to ethical conflicts. Number 2. Mustard gas tested on American military. Mustard gas is a type of chemical warfare agent, and as a chemical weapon, mustard gas was first used in World War I. In 1943, the U.S. Navy exposed its own sailors to mustard gas. Now, officially, the Navy was testing the effectiveness of the new clothing and gas masks against the deadly gas that had proven so terrifying in the First World War. But the worst of the experiments occurred at the Naval Research Laboratory in Washington. Young men were approached after 8 weeks of boot camp and asked if they wanted to participate in an experiment that would help shorten the war. Now, obviously, they said yes, but they didn't know what they were signing up for. Only when the boys reached the research laboratory were they told the experiment involved mustard gas. In 2015, Rollins Edwards, a soldier, spoke out about going through this experiment. He said, "It felt like you were on fire. Guys started screaming and hollering and trying to break out, and then some of the guys fainted. And finally, they opened the door and let us out, and the guys were in bad shape." Now, the participants almost all of whom suffered several external and internal burns, were ignored by the Navy, and in some cases threatened with the Espionage Act. In 1991, the reports were finally declassified and taken before Congress. And coming in at number 1 is the Aversion Project. The Aversion Project, led by Dr. Aubrey Levin, identified gay soldiers and conscripts who used drugs in the South African Defense Forces, the SADF. Victims were forced to submit to curing their homosexuality because the SADF considered homosexuality to be subversive, and those who were homosexual were subject to punishment. The homosexual undesirables were sent to a military hospital near Pretoria, a place called Ward 22, which in itself sounds terrifying. There, between 1971 and 1989, Dr. Aubrey Levin took care of patients. Now, many victims were subject to chemical castrations and electric shock treatment meant to cure them of their homosexual condition. Dr. Levin used electroconvulsive aversion therapy to reorientate his patients. Electrodes were strapped to the patient's upper arm with wires running to a dial calibrated from 1 to 10. Homosexual men were also shown pictures of naked men and then encouraged to fantasize, at which point the patient was subjected to severe shocks. Now, due to the lack of scientific evidence to prove that these procedures have the ability to alter sexuality, they began declining in frequency during the 1970s, when treatment for homosexual soldiers was no longer supported by the field of mental health. Consequently, the definition of homosexuals as mentally ill was removed from the American Psychiatric Association's manual in 1973, and the treatment was, thankfully, left behind. Well, that's all for our list of the top 10 unsettling human experiments in history you were never taught in American schools. Which experiment on our list shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments down below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm your host, Emily, and we'll see you next time. Peace.